You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 20th of June 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio 4 here at Dufourstrasse 90 in Zurich. I'm Andrew Muller. Coming up on today's programme,
I'm Juliette Linley, and I'm going to be looking at the Swiss papers, particularly a Swiss paper that is no longer. It has folded as a victim of the digital push and of the anti-litterbug brigade.
Also ahead, a US State Department veteran assesses President Trump's options where Iran is concerned. We'll take a look through the latest edition of Zurich architecture journal Hochparterre with one of its editors. We'll hear from our correspondent just back from the Klosters Forum, and
I'm Monocle's Ed Stocker, normally in Milan, but today in Zurich. I'll be rounding up my summer highlights in Italy and also crossing over into France.
That's all coming up right here on The Briefing, live from Zurich on Monocle Radio. And welcome to today's edition of The Briefing with me, Andrew Muller. It is the last day of Swiss Week here on Monocle Radio. The Briefing and the Daily have been coming from our studios here in Zurich every day. Today's Daily still to come. It seems therefore probably past time that we take a look at what has been making news in the host nation. And joining me to do exactly that is the journalist and broadcaster Juliette Linley. Juliette, welcome to The Briefing. We're going to start with what I guess is possibly bad news for fans of print newspaper, but good news for fans of cleaner trams.
Yes, so another freebie bites the dust. 20 Minuten. I remember when they launched it, it was a millennium baby, if you want. And I remember it was such a novelty to be able to just pick up a free newspaper and not have to fork out the 4 or 5 francs or whatever it is that it costs to buy a newspaper in this country, almost as much as a coffee. And yes, it was for commuters, right? And trams, bus stations, all the train stations had them. And now, of course, it's closing. I think there'll be 80 redundancies, and it'll just stay digital. And of course, the reason is, the anti-litterbug brigade. No one wants to see all this paper flutting around the windy stations and everything. But also, I guess they're thinking, if you're sitting on that train, you're probably looking at your phone and you're not going to be looking at paper. But we are big fans of paper, Andrew.
We are big fans of paper. There was, of course, a similar phenomenon that existed in London for many years. At one point, I think there were 3 or 4 free daily newspapers, which did have the effect on the London Tube that you can probably take a wild guess at. But in terms of its actual content, did this newspaper, which I will render in its English title 20 minutes, you see how much German I've picked up while I've been here. What kind of content was it? Where would you place it in the media landscape?
No, it was pretty yellow press, if you want. It would probably, some of the headlines would probably be linked to the latest reality show. But of course, as most of these, they also they've got the regular news too. They'll have a Reuters or an AP subscription usually. So you are actually getting proper news, which I worry about those who are just looking at their social media feeds on the phones, how much proper news they're actually getting. So it is a pity. And I remember, the Evening Standard in London, it's now a weekly or something. Is that right? It's still free?
I believe it is now a weekly. And when I say I believe, it's because I could not tell you the last time I saw anybody actually reading it on the tube. And I am old enough to remember when you could get onto a tube carriage in London and see almost nothing but people reading the Evening Standard.
Right. So I was looking there. I think there's Metro still in the UK, as well as in Canada and Denmark. Spain and France still have a 20 Minuten, a 20 minutes. But I think it's a cycle, though. I can't think that advertisers are really going to forego completely paper, because you always swipe away those digital ads when you're reading news on a phone. Whereas if you have it looking at you from the front page of a newspaper, it's kind of going to have more impact.
Well, let's move along to a tale of rivalry between Switzerland's great supermarkets.
Did you know that it's a thing?
I do now.
Well, now you do. So this is a story in the Tagesanzeiger that Switzerland's giant retailer Co-op is slashing prices on 1,000 supermarket items. breaking news. They are doing so because they want to relieve Swiss households, is how their press release put it, and relieve the budgets and prove their commitment to customers. Now, here's the word, commitment. You have to understand, Andrew, that in this country, people are really loyal and committed to either one supermarket or the other. It's either Coop or Migros.
Do families argue about this over Christmas dinner?
And
it
usually
splits brother against brother.
Splits generations.
Amazing.
Splits generations. And our valiant producer here in the studio, Desiree Bundley, who is the most Swiss of all of us in here, she says that she grew up next to a Migros and always used to go, or is it vice versa? But now she's actually crossed to the other side. No, but you will always find side by side. You'll always have a Migros and Coop facing each other, which kind of, you've got to wonder, I guess they're selling more or less the same sorts of things. But Migros was always sort of the more socially responsible, no alcohol, no ciggies until a few years ago. Coop had more premium stuff, but now even Migros sells booze and ciggies.
Is there any kind of class aspect underpinning this rivalry? Because I do know for people who've ever wondered what is the best possible way to start an argument, possibly escalating to all-in punch-up among a table of British people, is to ask them to rank British supermarkets in ascending order of poshness.
I think we have less of a class system here than there, but it is a bit sort of, Coop has the premium products, Migros has copies of them that slightly cost a bit less.
Well, we will move finally on to just an excuse to give the host country and host city a chance to boast.
Yeah, let's blow the trumpet for ETH. I mean, we love our rankings here at Monocle.
Blow the Alphorn, if you will.
Blow the Alphorn for ETH. So one more ranking, and this time is regarding education, universities to be more precise. So the QS global analyst Quacquarelli Simmons have put 3 Swiss unis in the top 100 in Europe. Coming out at number 1 is our flagship ETH, or known as ETH. It's the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, akin to MIT, which, as we all know, is the global number 1. And worldwide, ETH stands at number 7. So we're always blowing that Alphorn about it. And the other 2 Swiss ones that made it into the top 100 are the Lausanne's Federal Institute of Technology, coming out at 22. And just squeezing into the top 100 at number 100 is the University of Zurich.
I mean, just finally, Juliet, for all the undoubted excellence of Switzerland's universities, do they find it difficult to either attract foreign students or retain Swiss students? Because what I'm thinking is that Switzerland, for all its many virtues, is not a country oriented to the usual student's budget.
That's an interesting thought. You have to know that they're very organized when it comes to the WG phenomenon, which is that you share a flat with like 4 or 5 or 6 other students. So that's how you get around the high rents. But also they have so much money at the universities and they do attract top people. They've had 22 Nobel Prizes, just to give you one little statistic. And what happens is that I think there are about 500 companies that were born out of ETH. So they have a very strong entrepreneurial spirit, which does attract the top of the top to this Alpine nation, Alphorns and all.
Juliet Linley, thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing live from Zurich. Here is Tom Edwards back in London with the day's other headlines.
Thanks very much, Andrew. British, French and German foreign ministers are in Geneva today for talks with their Iranian counterpart. It's part of efforts to calm the growing conflict in the Middle East. Israel and Iran have exchanged missile strikes for 8 days with no sign of easing tensions. The White House says President Donald Trump will decide within 2 weeks whether the US will get directly involved. India's aviation investigators have not yet decided whether to send the black boxes from last week's Air India crash overseas for analysis. The flight crashed shortly after takeoff from Ahmedabad, killing at least 270 people. Reports claimed the recorders were being sent abroad, but officials say no final decision has been made. China has accused the United Kingdom of provoking tensions after a British warship sailed through the Taiwan Strait. The Chinese military says the patrol by HMS Bay was meant to disrupt peace. The Royal Navy says the move was part of a long-planned mission and followed international law. And Milan Men's Fashion Week is underway with designers showing collections under the theme Elegance, Edge and the Future of Menswear. Italian houses including Prada, Armani and Dolce & Gabbana will present their Spring-Summer 26 looks. Listen out for more on this and other stories from our team on the ground in Milan, on Monocle Radio and across monocle.com today and in the days ahead. Those are the headlines we're watching this hour. Back to you and Team Zurich, Andrew.
Thank you, Tom, in London. You are listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio, and we have been talking a lot this week about Art Basel, and may well do again on this evening's Daily, but that is not the only significant symposium occurring in the vicinity this week. The Klosters Forum has been taking place in the Alpine resort of that name. It gathers 80 invited experts every year to consider environmental issues. Among those attending this year was Jessica Bridger, journalist, consultant on urbanism and contributing editor to Monocle, and she joins us right here in the studio right now. Jessica, welcome to Dufferstrasse 90. First of all, before we talk about the Klosters Forum you've just been to, how would you explain the Klosters Forum as a general concept?
So the general concept of the forum is to bring together experts from various fields to talk about diverse issues. And this is the second edition in a 2-year cycle that's about urbanization. And we're all familiar with a lot of forums, conferences, all these things. And for all of us that go to them often, yourself included, Andrew, we all know that the most interesting things often happen in the side rooms, at the dinners, over coffees. And the Klosters Forum tries to take that kind of really generative sideshow and make it the main dish, essentially. So it's taking all those people and giving all of those experts a chance to start from that kind of really close, intimate thing and begin to build connections, make deals, things like that. And it's really interesting that it tries to do it from really diverse sectors. So at an urbanism conference, you usually have kind of the usual players. It's often the same people giving keynotes. But in this case, at the Klosters Forum, you had everyone from VCs to people doing things with timber in the United States to World Bank, UN Habitat, which are usual players, a lot of banks, foundations, urbanists, and a lot of people who are kind of engaged at a high enough level that they're capable and able to make decisions on the fly in that room with people who they might not normally even talk to in their normal conference life, in their normal daily life. It's that intimacy that makes, I think, the whole format really inspiring.
Well, let's talk then about this particular one you've just been at. At any conference, often a dominant theme emerges. Sometimes it's imposed by the organisers. Sometimes it just kind of occurs organically as a reaction to current events. At this Klosters Forum you've just been to, was there a particular thing?
The theme was kind of that we are at an inflection point, right? The conference began with Kristen Dunlop of Climate Kick, which is a public-private partnership working on climate change mitigation, giving a rather dire overview of the trajectory that we're on in terms of development, in terms of climate, looking at what happens if we do have 4 degrees centigrade warming by the end of the century, the collapse of major food baskets, the danger of the collapse of insurance markets, but with a hint of hope at the end. She was then directly followed by a man named Rob Hopkins with a challenge. What if we paint a positive picture of the future, challenging our current climate of despair? And he had this idea, what if we all got in a time machine? We came back and we told everyone, I've been to the future, we've been to the future, and we won. So it's kind of this shift of how do we, in a dark time, make it more positive that I think was super generative for everybody there. Because everyone there has worked on these issues a long time, and we are not in the most optimistic moment right now.
Well, indeed not. And this is, as you will know, a persistent problem, I think, with people who are trying to get people to take an interest in the climate and get action taken on the climate, is that when you start talking about this stuff, as more than one climate activist has said to me, people tend to lapse into either, apathy or despair. People start thinking quite quickly, well, there's nothing we can do. What's the point? So that's an interesting way of framing it, saying, starting with victory, triumph, success, and working backwards from there. Did that lend any clarity to what steps have to be taken to get to this point?
I don't know if it lent clarity as much as it validated the agency a lot of people feel they have. If you've been working from a development perspective on these issues for the past 2-3 decades, as many of the attendees are, or you're a newer comer, you understand that these are big systemic issues. They're at the global scale. They're very difficult to solve. But your mandate is to do that. And what's the alternative, right? So to then put a positive spin on it, saying, how do we, given what we know, given the challenges that we are all well aware of, nobody needs to explain those challenges in the room, right? They need to be explained explained in terms of sector, because you're talking to people who are far outside of the sectors that you normally might be. But they don't need to be explained in terms of the magnitude and the urgency of addressing them. I think one of the most interesting things that came out, though, is we're used to talking about the global scale. These are global scale issues, obviously, climate. How could it not be? But we're seeing this kind of shift toward local level solutions, toward looking at local level communities. And there was a lot of discussion at the Klosters Forum about local solutions, local government, local financing, but informed through avenues like the Klosters Forum and kind of a global exchange. And that's something that I've seen over the last few years really grow, whether that's United Cities and local government, new models for civic financing that get around a lot of national level roadblocks. And it's interesting at the Klosters Forum to see international organization leaders who commonly work with national level government putting local level governance and local level action forward as kind of the localization of a lot of these global goals, global agendas, and the global response at scale that we need to these challenges.
Jessica Bridger, Monocle's contributing editor, thank you for joining us here on The Briefing live from Zurich. This is Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. US President Donald Trump has given himself 2 weeks to make a decision on whether or not to assist Israel in further potential strikes against Iran's nuclear program. In Washington, D.C., members of Congress, including some Trump supporters, are divided on the wisdom of US military involvement. One expert who is calling for a diplomatic solution is the retired diplomat Tom Countryman. He spent 36 years at the US Department of State, including stints as Assistant Secretary for International Security and Non-Proliferation. He met with the reporter H.J. Mai at the Old Ebbitt Grill in D.C. H.J. started out by asking Countryman about his current assessment of the situation in the Middle East.
The 2015 nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA, Trump chose to violate it in 2018. With some very specific criticisms that it was not a long-term deal, that certain parts of it would expire after 10 or 15 years, and it wouldn't be a permanent guarantee that Iran could not ever achieve a nuclear weapon. What I see today is that the path that Netanyahu is on, and if it is joined by Trump, so much the worse, that path cannot result in a better outcome than the JCPOA. It is not a permanent, long-term solution. It is not possible to bomb away the knowledge that Iran has gained about enrichment, and it will make the job of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, even more difficult. So there is no possible outcome from Mr. Netanyahu's war that will be a better result than we could have had with the JCPOA.
What makes you so confident that bombing nuclear facilities, killing nuclear scientists, is not forcing Iran to the table?
Well, that seems to be Mr. Trump's theory. I don't think that Mr. Trump or the leader of any other self-respecting nation, when offered the choice of unconditional surrender or death, would say, okay, we surrender. That rarely happens in history. And I think that military action, particularly if the United States joins in, will compel Iran to make a decision that it has so far postponed for more than 20 years, which is to go all out towards a nuclear weapon. So I don't see that even what the Israelis call mowing the lawn and periodically bombing things and killing scientists is going to constrain a huge nation, a vast geographical area, 90 million people, from pursuing the very goal that Trump and Netanyahu are trying to prevent.
I know you left the State Department right as President Trump came into office during his first term. I'm wondering, what do you expect him to do? I mean, yesterday he told reporters, nobody knows what I'm going to do. Do you think, he's still willing to negotiate, or do you think he has made up his mind that there has to be a military solution?
Two statements that President Trump makes often that are always true. One is, I haven't read that. And two, nobody knows what I'm going to do. And that's a fact. I don't know what he's going to do. And he seems to believe that unpredictability is an asset in negotiation. But at the same time, I give him credit for not involving the United States in any new wars during his first term. That's a pretty good record for the average American president. And he campaigned strongly on that repeatedly. For him to walk away from that and to get into a new war, first, as an American citizen, that concerns me because it would be contrary to our Constitution. And it would be, I think, disaster strategically. But what he has to think about is what it means for his political standard. 60% of Americans in the latest polls say they do not want to go to war with Iran. Now, you never know how much Trump calculates what he's going to do based on polls. But he would be wise in this case not to lead his party and his administration into a political firestorm.
Do you believe that this has evolved from we want to take out Iran's nuclear program to regime change?
There are certainly some Israelis who speak that way, and certainly some hawks here in Washington who speak that way. I think it is not a realistic prospect. I can't say it is impossible. The regimes that are attacked by foreign nations generally experience an upsurge in popularity. There are loud Iranian-American voices saying this is the time for an uprising against the Ayatollahs. I hope someday there is a successful regime change in Iran. It is a despicable regime in many dimensions. But neither the U.S. nor Israel have a very good record in dictating change of regime for other countries.
That was Tom Countryman speaking to H.J. Mai. You are listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing on Monocle Radio, live from Zurich. And while there is a new issue of Monocle magazine on newsstands roundabout now, regular listeners to Monocle Radio, in particular to our tremendous programme The Stack, will be aware that we are enthusiastic about magazines besides our own. And one of our favourites is Hochparterre, published more or less monthly here in Zurich, with a focus on architecture and design. I'm joined now by Hochparterre's editor for landscape and planning, Maarit Ströbele. Maarit, welcome to The Briefing and welcome to our Zurich studios. You've arrived with the new edition. What's in it?
Well, it's actually, as always, a kind of a Wunderkammer of what's happening in design and architecture and landscape architecture and planning in Switzerland, with sometimes also a jump across some borders. Well, it starts off with a section on small newses and things that you heard, and then there are several big articles, and I would like to highlight two of them. One of them is actually asking about carbon removal in the construction sector, because there is a lot of talk about how to take the CO2 out of the atmosphere and how this is done, but there is not so much research. And one of my colleagues, Palle Petersen, did a large research on this.
So this is about not just making the finished buildings more environmentally friendly, but the construction of them as well. No, it's just about
the back. So is constructing in wood or using new types of concrete that are less carbon intensive, is this really good enough for mitigating the climate change problem, or does anything else have to be? It's a big research article on the physics of construction materials, on the question what kind of business models are behind carbon removal and certificates, and all the problems that you actually get when you start accounting for CO2 use and removal, because it's not so easy to calculate. And what we offer is a large series of articles with statistics and a lot of points of view on this topic, and also voices of people who are really experts in the sector.
You also have a feature, as I understand it, on a major attempt at urban renewal in Zurich. This is Die Säulenhalle.
Exactly. That's a supplementary
I have the
magazine.
Supplement here. It's very colourful.
It's really. We also have these supplementary magazines, and as a editorial group, we not only report on what's happening in Zurich or in Switzerland in general. By the way, we also cover the French and Italian-speaking parts of the country, but sometimes we also engage in really urbanistic or political projects. And this Säulenhalle is concerned with a elevated highway in Zurich, underneath which there is a tram at the moment, and it's in the center of a neighborhood that kind of, according to many people, lacks a proper center. And it's a proposal to put the tram aside from under the bridge to the street beside it, and use the space under the bridge as a protected from the weather public space and center of this new developing neighborhood. And this is kind of a way that we also engage with what's happening in Swiss urban politics and architecture. And by the way, tonight, if anybody's interested and speaks German or Swiss, there is going to be a discussion at 7:00 on this topic.
And where can people find that? In either live or tune into it?
You can find it live if you look at our website, hochparterre.ch.
Maarit Ströbele, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing, live from Zurich with me, Andrew Muller. And finally, on today's show, it is time for our weekly summer series where we are tapping Monocle's editors and leading contributors to regale us, it says here, with their summer recommendations from seasonal dishes and engrossing beach reads to magical vacation spots and elevated fashion tips. For our second edition, this week I am joined by Ed Stocker, Monocle's Europe editor-at-large, who is normally at large in Milan, but just for today is at large right here in our Zurich studio. Ed, welcome.
Elevated fashion tips, yikes.
Well, yeah, no pressure. So if you haven't got elevated fashion tips or indeed magical vacation spots, engrossing
I've
beach
got
reads...
location. I've definitely got I've got lots of locations.
Okay.
Where should we start? We don't have long, do we? I better be quick.
You'd better be quick, but you can do your 5 recommendations in whatever order you see fit.
Okay, well, we'll start in Verona. Okay. Beautiful location not far from Milan. Opera season is in full swing already. It started in June. It's running through basically the whole of the summer. For those who don't know it, there's an incredible arena there called Arena. See what they did there?
Up all night working on that.
Working on that. Also, the newspaper there's called Arena.
Okay.
Anyway, beautiful opera season. They have incredible things like Aida and Carmen. These evening performances in this incredible Roman amphitheatre. Definitely one to check out.
Okay. There's also definitely a location you think people should visit, and this is people who are thinking about taking some sort of summer holiday in Liguria, and why would anybody not be thinking about that?
Yeah, exactly. I was visiting a place called Radical Farmhouse for our summer newspaper, Mediterraneo, and so you can read about it when that comes out. But it's this new idea from this young couple. She's from Italian-speaking Switzerland, and he's from Argentina. They've set up this incredible restaurant. They have a huge orchard there. They grow all their own food, basically. It's a vegetarian menu. They do these amazing long table dinners on Saturday night. and this sort of more relaxed brunch on Sundays in this just incredible setting that's just a couple of minutes drive back from the beach in Lavagna in Liguria. They're planning to open rooms at some point in the future, but for now it's just this Saturday and Sunday night, occasionally Mondays. Really interesting crowd goes there, and a beautiful spot. So if you're in Liguria, it's something a little bit different to check out.
People can find out more about that one at radicalfarm.bio. There's a recommendation you had from Venice, and Venice is a city that, like many people, I've always found mesmerising, but what mesmerises me mostly is wandering around it, or occasionally sloshing around it, is thinking of the planning meeting at which some prince persuaded a bunch of other princes that it was really important that they built a glorious city of palaces out in the swamp. And I do wonder how that conversation went. Did someone try to point out to him, but we have land, we could build it on land? And he says, no, it's really important that we build it on stilts in the swamp. And he somehow persuaded them, but someone's now done something similar with cinema.
Seafaring nation, you know.
Well, there's that.
La Serenissima. So this is at the end of your summer, so you can get planning. This is at the end of August and the beginning of September. Basically, more or less during the film festival in Venice, there's this thing called Cinema Galleggiante, which means floating cinema. It's on the island of Giudecca, the back of the island, facing the lagoon. This incredible floating cinema that's organised by Paolo Rosso, who's this leading cultural figure in Venice, and a load of his friends. Sort of art house cinema. It's quite high end. And they have live music performances, and they often team up with chefs who do amazing food on the island, and then you take a boat out and watch this film as the sun sets over the lagoon. It's pretty magical. I went last year.
When you say high end, anybody who's hoping to see Herbie Goes Bananas is going to be disappointed?
It's not. I don't know what's on the programming this year.
It might be Herbie Goes Bananas.
I would say unlikely.
Okay, never mind. Pivoting away slightly from Italy towards France, specifically Provence.
Yeah, we'll finish in Italy maybe, but yes, this is a recommendation that's been made to me by a friend in New York. I haven't been yet. It's called Domaine de la Cavalerie. I hope I pronounced that right. It's about an hour north of Marseille, so in Provence, this incredible location. It's set in a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, no less. Basically, two properties, a 12th century sort of mini palazzo and this 17th century farmhouse that you can rent out. The farmhouse has just been renovated. This was basically a property owned by a fashion designer called Emanuele Ungaro, and his daughter took over when he died in 2019, and she's sort of been modernising it, changing it up a little bit, as I say, renovating this farmhouse that's now open. It just looks like an amazing setting, surrounded by olive groves as well. They make their own olive oil. So if you're looking for a little Provence sojourn, it could be there.
This all sounds, everything you have recommended does sound so far tremendously pleasant, and I'm pretty confident looking at the notes here that we can do 5 out of 5, because back to Italy. And of course the Monocle Summer Party in Murano. Indeed.
In South Tyrol. We have a summer party there every year. It marks our decade in Murano, which is a beautiful location. So if you are interested, I believe you can write to Linda at the Monocle shop if you happen to be in town and plan to come. I think some of our editors will be there, and including myself, by the way, and there'll just be lots of interesting people gathering there and having a few drinks come the evening outside our shop in Murano.
Ed Stocker, Monocle's editor-at-large, thank you for joining us. That is all for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Chris Chermak and Desiree Bandley in Zurich. Our researcher was Henry King, and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing returns on Monday at the same time, but not from Zurich or indeed London. Our travelling roadshow moves to Paris next week. Emma Nolson will be your host for that. From Zurich, I'm Andrew Muller. I'm back with The Daily later this evening, but for now, thanks for listening.